and welcome to another This OMG Fishing video. Today we're going to be doing a tying seminar, not a traditional fly so to speak, but we're going to be doing a bucktail jig. And any bucktail jig is typically made up of, well, bucktail. Now there are several, I guess we would call them fake furs that are on the market that you could use just as well. They tend to have a little bit more flow to them than the bucktail. Bucktail's fairly rigid material, but would work just as effective as any of the other materials. So probably one of the big things to do, or to try and remember when you're making a bucktail jig, is to not load it up with too much fur. This jig here, yellow bucktail, that's probably about as much bucktail fur as I would put on one of these. Problem is, if you dress it up too much, it just turns into like an underwater paintbrush, and it's just this stiff gob of fur in the water, and it doesn't tend to flow a whole lot. There's not a lot of movement in one of these, but there is enough when you have fewer bits of the bucktail tied to it. And typically, you know, I would use a 16th jig head as probably the smallest size that I would use. If you go any smaller than that, they're really quite difficult to tie, and I'm not sure if you're gaining any value out of using a fly that small with bucktail. This here is a 16th size right here, which is nice for panfish, crappie, bass, perch. Then you go up to an 8th size, which is the size that we will be tying with. And again, and I tend to sort of double the gap with my fur, so the gap of the hook is here. You can see that. And then I just add that much more fur to it. You can make them as long as you want. You can make them as short as you want. I think if you go shorter than this, your fly just kind of looks and acts really odd in the water. So that's kind of the ratio that I tend to use. And you can, you know, use the swim jig head with these when you tie them. You can use a bottom jig, so that would just put your bucktail on there. That sits out on the bottom, does its thing. You can use an underspin jig. I like these. These are pretty handy to use. I tend to use plastics on these more than I would a bucktail. But there's an option there. There's just tons of other jig heads. There's football jig heads. There's wobble heads. There's, you name it, it's there. And, you know, combined with, you know, any color you can think of in a bucktail, the options and opportunities are limitless. I think you can pretty much make any kind of a bucktail fly that you want to match the hatch. One of the other things that you might want to do is also you can tie it with marabou. Instead of using the bucktail, you can wrap it with marabou. I'm not going to do a marabou one today. I'm just going to do the bucktail, and I think that'll be sufficient for now. And I'll talk about a couple of other things along the way when we're constructing this. So stay tuned. We're about to go and tie one on. I'll do this with a 1/8 size round-headed jig. Any brand is fine. You can go as inexpensive as you want or as expensive as you want. It's totally up to you. I'm going to use a sort of fire tiger kind of head on it here, just so it's more visible. And one of the things that I do right off the start is it has this little bait holder knob on here, and I just crush that down. This way your fur sits a little flatter. Once you've crushed down the barb, then we'll put a thread base down. I tend to use a slightly heavier thread for tying on a bucktail. I just find that it it tends to widen out a bit more. I don't know if you can see how that thread gets a little wide, and it just tends to hold the fur in place a lot better. So we'll just get that all set. And I also don't use a hair stacker on any of this as well, because I like to try and maintain the taper of the buck hair. So I'll just cut off a little piece, and this is this part here is really quite trial and error as to how much you're going to put on here. It depends on how thick you want your fly, but tend to try and get all the little teensy stuff out of the way. Make a little pile and save it for tying some other flies with. Now, as I was saying, I tend to like to get in the range of being twice the length of my hook gap. We'll just clean this up. Hopefully my furnace didn't make too much noise for you there. Hear it in the background. We're having a blustery, windy day here. So I'll just put that down. And I'm just going to do some loose wraps on this for now. And the reason that I'm going to do that is just so that I can spread this hair out. And what I'll do is I'm just going to turn this and look and see. You know, I'll have a few stragglers up here. I can clean all that up later. Just want to make sure that it's balanced out before I, you know, get in and tie that down. And I don't want to get in and really put the pressure on it right here. It is bucktail. It doesn't flare as much as body hair will, but when you do that, it will still flare out. So that's essentially the top half. Or the bottom half, however you want to look at it. And I'm just going to do this in yellow. You can two-tone your fly, you can three-tone it. Like I was saying earlier, the options are endless. Right from the start, from your jig head right to your bucktail color selection. You can even add some flashaboo to this if you want to add a little more zing to it. I usually don't, and that's mostly because where I fish, it tends to be more of a reactionary strike than a finesse kind of thing. I'm usually fishing in a fairly good bit of current, and this jig usually is just passing by. Again, I can do the same thing, just do some loose wraps. Up here, the thread usually cleans most of this stuff up. And I'm just going to spread it around a little bit, just to make sure that that hook shank is getting covered up. And I'm going to tighten it up. That should pick up any loose hairs we have. Come in with the whip finisher. And just tighten that up. And typically what I'll do after this is I'll add just a little bit of crazy glue just to make sure everything sits where it's going. It's better to kind of do this before you do your final wraps on it, because sometimes your glue will get fuzzy and hazy on you. But to me it doesn't really matter if it gets fuzzy and hazy. The other option that you can do as well is add a bit of head cement on there, and that'll take care of that as well. So Just go back here. Open this up. I'm going to just clean out some of the other feathers that we don't really need in here. And there you go. Hair jig. It's not a difficult fly to tie, and you know, you got the odd hair kind of hanging out here and there. You can just come in, clean it up. Like I said, you can finish this off with head cement. That'll make that a lot tidier. I tend to think you don't really need it, but again, that's your preference. So yeah, there we have it. Hope you enjoyed this little fly tying or jig tying seminar, and if you did, thumbs up would be appreciated. Subscribe, that would be great too. Put a fair amount of work into these. I haven't put anything out lately. COVID kind of did a number on me, but I'm back at it now, and by all means, you know, leave comments if there's something that you want to see me tie, or if you have any techniques or anything that you'd like to share with me, that'd be greatly appreciated. So yeah, easy peasy. You know, a lot of my fly tying stuff is very, very simple, which is the objective of what I'm trying to do. I don't want to make something complicated that is a real task to try and get through. So here you have an easy to tie bucktail jig. So if you're looking for any of these, give me a call, and we'll see if we can set you up with some. And get out there, do some fishing, take a kid out, and remember, practice CPR, catch, photo, release. Get out there and enjoy things. Thank you. Bye-bye.
That's what I'm talking about right there.